Welcome back to Sermon Rewind. As always, glad to have you with me. As you know, Sermon Rewind is a weekly show that looks back to the sermon from the previous Sunday in hopes of better answering your questions that you had as we apply these principles in our daily Christian lives. We are in the midst of the book of Acts, and we will be still for some time. This last week, we tackled the whole of chapter 14, verses 1 through 28, which was essentially kind of the middle of Paul and Barnabas as they continued to make their missionary round through what we refer to as the Mediterranean West. And during this time, there's a unique experience. There seems to be lots of unique experiences, but there are two in particular that stood out on this leg of the journey. On the one hand, they landed in one city, Iconium, where Paul and Barnabas were not well liked. Their message was not well liked. The Jews and the Gentiles were kind of fighting to get them out of the city. It was a real rough experience. Then, once they left, they landed in a place called Lystra, where ultimately the reception was very different. As they were there and preaching good news, the Lord performed a miracle and redeemed a crippled man, and the city went berserk. All of a sudden, the missionaries were well liked, their message was loved, and all they wanted was to make a really, really big deal of their lives. So two very unique, contrasting experiences. And ultimately, the big idea of our sermon was that when it comes to the mission of Jesus, something for us to learn is that whether it's loved or it's hated, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about any of us. And so as we're sort of navigating what it looks like to be on mission ourselves, there are some questions that come to bear. And I tried to answer those questions in our sermons in two different ways. So the first question was, how should you or me live on mission when we or our message is not well liked? So if we have a similar experience, though in our own context, as things were at Iconium, what does it look like for us to be on mission in the midst of that? How should we behave? What should we be doing? And then the flip side, what if the message or the messengers are far too well liked? What if we're inappropriately appreciated or honored or maybe even worshiped a little bit? What does it look like for us to navigate a life of mission in those circumstances? So this was a big sermon, to be honest with you, not because of me, but because of the content itself. And we found through our questions that there are a lot of us who kind of wrestle with these things ourselves in our own ways, in our families, in our friend groups, with neighbors, strangers, coworkers, you name it. So here's what we have for questions from you, the viewers. The first question, which actually was sort of teased out between two different people, I think, was I made the statement that we ought to be cautiously and considerately proclaiming Christ as Lord without letting our feelings or our experiences get in the way until there is no longer an effective or fruitful way forward. So we go all in with preaching good news. We don't dance around it. We don't mince words, and we will share it and share it and share it as an absolute reality for whoever the Lord gives us the grace to share it with until we reach a particular limit. A couple of our questions were about that limit. If there is no longer an effective or fruitful way, how do we know what that is? Can you expound on this? It sounds like essentially you're saying there is a point in which we can throw our hands up in the air and give up, that this could be a reason for an out. Another question was asked this way: where is that line exactly? When it comes to things that we should do, like praying without ceasing or never giving up against things like dusting off our sandals and moving on to the next city. How do we know when our conversations, when our ministry, when our mission isn't fruitful? And is that even our own decision? These are really important questions. I think they're at the heart of every Christian who is on mission. I think we wonder that as we interact with, again, good friends and family members, and people don't receive well what we have to say. Maybe they begin to sort of cut us even out of their lives. How do we know when enough is enough? I want to start by saying two things. One, there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to this. Okay, so if anybody that is watching right now is saying, okay, I need to know if I have the green light to be done because this is painful, this is difficult, I want to know if I can be done, if I've done everything I can do. I don't know that I can give you an immediate answer for that. When you look at the disciples or the apostles' behavior in Iconium, for example, it actually says that when the persecution and the objections to their being there, when they first started, it was pretty mild, but it was there. They knew they weren't liked. They knew their message wasn't liked. They were kind of getting moved around, and there were plans to harm them even. And it says that they didn't flee, they didn't run, but it actually says they planned to stay even longer than they had originally planned, and they preached even more boldly than they did before. So when you're asking this question, perhaps the first thing that you need to ask yourself is, have I dug my heels in, drawn a line in the sand, and said, I am going to be more bold, more direct, more faithful, more purposeful in pointing to Jesus than I ever have before? Have you actually done that in this relationship already? Or have you been ambiguous and have you kind of danced around the subject? You got to answer that question first. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to give you a quick out. I think that's really important, that the apostles didn't have a quick out. They literally dug their heels in and they fought the good fight until there wasn't another option. So how do we know when there's no longer another option? I would say when the other person has officially made it clear to you that I do not want to talk about this anymore. I do not want to hear how Jesus can save my life. I do not want you to pray for me. I do not want you to encourage me if your encouragement comes from the Bible or comes from your Judeo-Christian belief system. I do not want to hear about your worldview. I will remove myself from relationship with you entirely if you say another thing about him. I think that is a clear indicator of a principle that Jesus taught his disciples and was clearly an apostolic nuance that succeeded them. And that is that Jesus uses this phrase, do not cast your pearls before swine. There's a warning not to take what is valuable and to just frivolously give it away to those who don't have the ability, the perception, the knowledge, the wisdom, or just the grace to be able to receive it. There is a sense in which we say, okay, we've reached a limit. Now I'm just throwing diamonds to the feeding trough. And it's doing nothing for them. They're refusing it. There's nothing I can do to change that. I'll happily continue to pray for them, but there is a point where I've reached a limit and I can no longer tell them the truth because it's wasteful. That energy that I have to share could better be utilized elsewhere. You have to resolve between you and Jesus what that limit looks like and whether or not you've actually reached it. But to be fair, it's not a quick out. It is not every time that someone disagrees with you or if the conversation gets hard or if the relationship gets weird. That is not the time that this applies. This applies when there is no longer another way forward, when God has not parted the sea, when God has not brought fire from heaven, when God has not made supernatural work of your circumstance and there seems to be nowhere else to go. This is a moment where you can freely take your energy and your gospel witness elsewhere. I hope that helps. We should not be quick to that. That should be over tears and fear and all kinds of prayer and fasting. Really, it should be a long road to get there. But like I said, there is a point in which it's okay to be done. The second question, and I think is kind of a more broad question, but something that I think is important to address here is, how do we talk about Jesus in practical terms? When we're talking to friends or neighbors, how do we talk to him? Or how do we talk about him in a way that's normal and simple? It's a sad, sad reality that I think preachers and I think Christian material, books, podcasts, etc., have given us a vernacular that is so far removed from normal, common speech that we actually have to ask this question at all. Jesus is not impractical, actually. The stories of Jesus are not impractical. The basic theology of Christ as the Son of God who came and died and gave his life so that we might have life to its full, these are not impractical things. People are wondering these things all the time. Is there meaning to my life? Is there more to life than this? I feel like I'm spinning my wheels and getting nowhere. I feel like every mistake I make, I find myself at the bottom with no way back up. These are very practical things that people are dealing with every day. I said something on Sunday and I stand by it, and I still think this is the best way to go about this. Familiarize yourself with better stories about Jesus. On Sunday, I said that the world is filled with bad information, bad stories about Jesus, and I think that's true. I think people think that he is a religious zealot. I think people think that he is a conservative governmental zealot or revolutionary, and usually on the wrong side of history. I think all the ways that people have been vexed or frustrated or wounded by churches or Christians are automatically attributed to him, and oftentimes it's not fair. So the stories about Jesus are rampant. We have an opportunity to open up our Bibles regularly and not just read them for devotional sake. I want to encourage you, if you're someone who reads your Bible 2 minutes a day and you feel like you're getting somewhere with that, I'd like to encourage you to do more than that. If I can say it any other way, it shouldn't be parsed up in these little tiny pieces. Jesus enters into human life and he enters into people's stories and he weeps with them and he pleads with them and he encourages them and he challenges them. We should be familiar with what he is saying and what he is doing so that we can re-narrate who Jesus is to a world who doesn't know him. Your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, these complete strangers that you interact with, they want to know what it is that you know. They may not realize that, but they do. And Jesus is a very practical, able to be assessed and experienced by anyone the world over, individual. He's not out of reach. He's not aloof. The things about his life are not strange when it comes to human life. The word says it really clearly that we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with us in our weakness, but one who has lived it, who has been tested and tried and did so without sinning. If there's anyone that knows normal human life, it's Jesus. So again, familiarize yourself with his stories and then tell those better stories about him. Tell them in normal vernacular. Talk like a normal person. Please do that. But tell better stories about Jesus and don't be ashamed of it, afraid of it, or worried about it. There is nothing with more power to transform the human life than the wonderful stories of Jesus' redemptive work in the world. Nothing. So lean into that, lean hard into that. I promise you that's what I'm doing. I hope that's what you're doing. And I hope that we can continue to encourage one another when we see each other soon. This is the good and worthy work of the mission of the Lord Jesus Christ. Love it, go hard after it, pour your life out to make him known. Can't wait to see you guys next week. Look forward to it.